Hello and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're sharing our guide for the Temple of Sethraliss dungeon on Mythic.
Yes, this tutorial will give you all the information you need to know for the first few weeks of farming Mythic 0 dungeons, but should also help you on higher Mythic Plus keys. We've got a ton to discuss, so let's kick straight into it.
Zoning into the instance will give you two paths to choose from. You should head to the left as this will allow you to clear some trash now that otherwise you would need to clear later to reach the second boss. Dust Devils will cast Lightning Bolt, dealing damage to a random player. Although you can kick this, you should save your kicks for the Healing Surge cast, which will heal a trash mob for a huge amount. As for the Marksmans, they'll face a player and cast Power Shot. You want to sidestep out the way of this cast before the shot fires. These mobs will also apply Neurotoxin to a random player. This 8-second debuff will stun you for 5 seconds if you move, so you need to make sure you stand still or you're dispelled. Whilst fighting the Stone Fists, ranged players make sure you stay at least 30 yards away from them. When they cast Ground Pound, it will deal damage and interrupt anyone within 30 yards of them. Shrouded Fangs will buff themselves with Blade Flurry, which increases their attack speed and causes their melee attacks to chain to another player within 5 yards of the tank. So melee players need to avoid standing too close to the tank. As you enter the first boss's area, do note that you do not need to kill all the trash around the edges. This trash can be avoided as long as you're careful throughout the boss fight.
Now the first encounter is against Azeroth and Aspix. They will each take turns holding the Lightning Shield buff, which roots the boss, granting them access to a different set of abilities. Players should focus damage onto the non-Lightning Shield boss, as hitting the shield will actually deal a burst of damage back to you. Now whilst the boss is holding the shield, they'll gain energy over time. After reaching 100% energy, the boss will cast a signature ability and then give the shield to the other boss, and they'll keep juggling it between themselves. Now Aspix starts the fight with the shield. He'll spam cast Jolt, dealing damage to a random player. You might as well interrupt this as there isn't any other cast to interrupt at this time. When he reaches 50% energy, Aspix will put a debuff on a player which will explode after 5 seconds, dealing damage to anyone within 8 yards of them, so just make sure you move away from your allies. At 100% energy, Aspix will do a large burst of unavoidable damage to the entire group. The healer should make sure that everyone is topped up before this damage comes in, and players should definitely consider using personal cooldowns to help survive this hit, especially on high Mythic Plus keys. Now when Aspix doesn't have the shield, he will cast Gust at the tank. As Jolt isn't being cast anymore, this is the new interruptible spell, so you might as well kick this instead. He will also channel Gale Force at a player. The player should run against this pushback just to make sure they're not pushed into any of the trash that you skipped earlier on. Talking about the other boss now, when Azeroth has the shield and he reaches 50% energy, he will cast a Peal of Thunder, appearing at a location and dealing a burst of damage to anyone within 15 yards. Just make sure you move away from this quickly. At 100% energy, Azeroth will cast Arc Dash. This series of dashes deals damage to anyone in his path as he charges from player to player. Make sure you spread out just to reduce the chances of being hit multiple times across the ability. Also, right now at least, you need to avoid standing near the walls as the boss can get stuck in the wall and he'll completely reset. Now when Azeroth doesn't have the shield, he will cast Cyclone Strike focused towards a random player's location. You need to sidestep away from the front of Azeroth at this time to avoid the incoming tornadoes that move out in a cone. He will also cast Arcing Blade, dealing damage split between all players within 15 yards. The group should stack underneath Azeroth the entire time he is shieldless just to help split this damage. Now after killing the boss, the group should head northwest towards the next encounter. Whilst fighting the Krolusk Riders, make sure you purge their Electrified Scales buff, which deals damage to players who are attacking the ad. Also, tank the ad facing away from the group for the cleave attack, and you should also dodge the Noxious Breath cast. You'll come across 2 different snakes on this path as well. Venomous Ophidians will apply a poison dot frequently to the tank. This should be dispelled if possible. The Sand-Crusted Snakes will spawn a Dust Cloud, which causes all abilities to miss enemies that are within it, and it also reduces players' hit chance by 100% if they stand within it. The tank should just do their best to move any trash out of these dust clouds, whilst DPS annihilate these annoying snakes. Now mature Krolusk will cast Noxious Breath, just like the Krolusk Riders before, but they will also cast Scoring Sand, which deals damage and applies a 20% damage taken increase to all players within a 20-yard frontal cone, so make sure you don't stand in it. Now as you enter the Clutch of the Great Mother area, you will need to clear all the trash to summon the boss. Now Crazed Incubators have a ton of dangerous abilities. Make sure to kick the Stone Shield Potion, which would otherwise reduce the damage taken by an ad by 90%. You want to move from the lightning in a bottle patch of goo on the ground, and make sure you quickly kill off this ad when it's on low health, before its Pyrrhic Blast goes off, dealing damage to anyone within 10 yards. Faithless Tenders should be kicked when they cast Greater Healing Potion, as this will heal their target and any other trash within 5 yards for a huge amount. Now both the Incubators and the Tenders apply poison debuffs to random players that you should dispel if you have a poison removal handy. They will also run towards a nearby egg and cast Drain when they're on low health. At the end of the channel, they will heal for a huge amount and gain a 30% damage dealt increase. You should really CC this drain cast to stop it from happening. If the cast does go through and you kind of fucked up, just purge off their damage dealt increase. Now be careful once all the trash has been killed, as you do not want to stand directly in the middle of the room as the boss appears, as you might pull her prematurely.
When fighting Merektha, watch out for when she faces towards the direction of a random player and begins to cast Noxious Breath. This deals damage to anyone who stands within it and also places some toxic pools on the ground. You want to sidestep the cast and avoid standing within the pools. You also need to face away from the boss when Blinding Sand is cast, as this will disorient you for 5 seconds. This ability also deals a burst of damage to the group, so healers make sure you top the party up beforehand. She will also occasionally spawn a knot of snakes on top of a random non-tank player, stunning them for up to 15 seconds. DPS should very quickly swap to these snakes to release the player. Currently you can use hard CC on the snakes, which causes them to despawn instantly, which is probably a bug. When she reaches 60% health, she will burrow under the ground and start to circle around the room. If you are within her path, you'll take a burst of damage and be knocked back, so you need to do your best to avoid it. Whilst underground, she will occasionally shoot across the room after some announcement text, so just watch out. As she burrows, 4 venomous Ophidians will spawn at the edge of the room. Just like the trash, kill them quickly whilst dispelling the poison dot on the tank if possible. Around 30 seconds later, the boss will re-emerge and the fight will continue until she's brought to 45% health. She will then burrow again for 30 seconds, this time spawning sand-crusted snakes instead. Kill the snakes whilst moving them from their dust clouds. Once she reappears, you then just need to finish the last 45% of her health, and then you can move northeast towards the next boss. While fighting the agitated Nimbusads, interrupt their accumulated charge cast or purge the buff that they gain that increases their damage done by 50%. If they keep this buff, they will also cast Release Charge, which deals damage to all players within 40 yards whilst also removing the buff. As for the Stormcallers, they will cast Shock, which deals damage to random players. You can interrupt this if you want, but really you should be saving them for the Nimbusads instead. While fighting the Stormcallers, lightning strikes will hit the ground nearby, just make sure you avoid it. You'll then have to go through a loose spark rotating mess. If you are hit, you'll take some damage and be placed back to the beginning of the gauntlet, so you don't want to screw this up. Once you've made it through, you'll have to start fighting the Dervishads. Watch out for the swirlies that they place underneath players. They'll teleport to these locations and just deal damage to anyone within them. Once all the Dervishads have died, they'll form into the next boss, Galvazd, in the middle of the room.
Now throughout this fight, several energy core pillars will appear in the room and will beam energy towards the boss. If the boss reaches 100% energy, he will deal a burst of damage to the entire group, reset his energy back to 0, and gain a permanent 20% damage increase, which of course will stack each time he gains another 100% energy. Players need to stand in the beams going towards the boss to intercept them. This does deal ticking damage to the player and apply a stacking buff which increases the damage you take from the beam. Because of this, the entire group should take turns at soaking the beams, making sure they let their debuff time out when they are around 10 stacks. Now the entire group needs to be topped out throughout the fight, as the boss will be dealing damage to everyone when he casts Induction. This isn't too bad initially, but it does really hurt if the boss has a bunch of damage increase stacks. After Galvazd is dead, head north towards the last boss. You'll have another loose Sparks maze to go through as you cross a bridge. This bridge has pillars on it which slow nearby players by 50%, so you want to try and not stand next to them for too long. You want to pull the Spark Channeler as soon as possible to stop the waves of loose sparks from flowing across the bridge. You want to interrupt his shot cast to stop a random player from taking a bit of damage, as well as dodge the lightning he calls down. After this, you have a little bit of a gauntlet event, in which you need to bring the 2 orbs in the room to the giant snake head. Doing so will cause the snake's mouth to open and grant passage to the last boss. Now this area is absolutely swarming with faithless conscripts, which will just melee attack the tank, as well as orb guardians which don't deal damage to the group generally, but instead chase the player who has the orb. If they do get to that orb player, they will snatch it off of them and begin to move it back to its original location. So a player should move towards the head with the orb, whilst the rest of the group defends them by killing all trash in their path. Whilst holding the orb, your movement speed is limited, but you can throw the orb to a target location with an extra action button, allowing you to pass the orb around at a faster speed. Now you do not need to throw the orb at the snakehead once you reach it, just stand next to it and that will place the orb within the eye sockets. Once the skull is opened, you want to move down the path towards the last boss. When fighting Voodoo Hexes, dispel the Flame Shock dot applied to random players and out-heal the incoming Lava Burst damage. Heart Guardians deal damage and apply 20% damage taken increase for 10 seconds to the tank when Heart Attack is cast. This is cast frequently and it will stack, so the group should nuke these guys down first, or the tank may need to kite to let the debuff drop. When fighting the Plague Doctors, interrupt their Chain Lightning casts, whilst the healer dispels the Snake Charm debuff which will otherwise incapacitate a random player. Once all the trash in the area has been defeated, you can speak to the avatar of Sethraliss to start the encounter. Now this boss is a bit of a nightmare in its current state and can be very difficult to kill in these last days on beta, even on Mythic 0. The entire goal of the fight is for the boss to be healed to 100% health, at which point the encounter is over. Now Hoodoo Hexer adds will channel Taint into the boss, reducing the healing it receives by a huge amount. The healer shouldn't really even bother healing the boss during this time, and instead should focus on keeping the group topped up. As the Hexers are channeling, they do not need to be tanked, and DPS should aim to kill them off as soon as possible. Whilst these Hexers are alive, 2 different abilities will hit the group. Pulse will apply a 12-second dot to the entire group, and this debuff is completely unavoidable, and it does a decent amount of damage. Plague Toads will rain down from above every 25 seconds whilst the Hexers are alive, and a final wave will spawn as soon as the Hexers die. These toads will move towards the healer and explode upon touching any player, applying the Plague Disease debuff, which deals ticking damage and reduces healing done by 50%. Now this debuff can stack, however the healing reduction will always remain capped at 50%. Players should kill the toads either by damaging them or running into them, whilst the healer does their best to dodge any toads that move towards them. This is a great time to be using crowd control spells just to keep your healer safe. On top of this, whilst the Hexers are alive, 2 different ads will spawn, and they're just the ads from the trash. You have the Heart Guardians and the Plague Doctors. The Guardians apply the damage taken increase to the tank, and the Plague Doctors cast Chain Lightning, which you should interrupt, as well as applying the Incapacitate to a random player in the group, which needs to be dispelled as soon as possible. Once again, the group should kill these ads as a high priority. Something that's different from the trash is that when the Guardian dies, it will spawn an orb on the ground. Using this orb will buff the boss for 15 seconds, causing all healing spells to heal for an additional 1000 points of healing. This should be saved when all Hexers have been killed and the boss can receive meaningful healing. As soon as the Hexers have died, none of the abilities we just talked about happen. The group has 15 seconds to spam the living hell out of the boss just to heal him up before a new wave of Hexers spawn. However, especially on Mythic Plus, your healer might be completely out of mana at this point, which leads to probably the most stupid strat out of any 5-man I've seen so far. These Hexers will not respawn unless the boss hits 40% health on the first wave, 70% on the second time, and 80% for the third time. So in theory, your group can just sit there and wait for your healer's mana to recharge, which might be necessary on these high Mythic Plus keys at the beginning of the expansion. Once the Hexers do respawn, either 15 seconds later or when the boss reaches 40% for the first time, the group just needs to rinse and repeat what they just did until the boss reaches 100% energy, at which point you win and the instance is over.
But thank you very much for watching. If this guide helped you out, then do drop us down a like. It helps us out a lot. If you'd like to know more about this instance with clear tooltips, as well as up-to-date strategies on all the trash and bosses, then go check out our full featured guide over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description. Before we do go, we'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. Your support allows us to do these types of videos, so we appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we shall see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.